Petrochemicals both created and fuel the world that we live in today. Unfortunately, they're also fueling this thing called climate change. So today I wanted to take a look at one of those petrochemicals, gas, how it fits into New Zealand and how it's going forward. Gas starts out as organic matter, like me, that ends up in a hole in the ground, like this one, and over millions of years converts chemically into oil and gas. I don't have millions of years, so I'm not going to show you the whole process, but that's the basics of it. All of our oil and gas is extracted from the relatively small region of Taranaki. This has meant the entire petrochemical industry has surrounded itself around Taranaki. If you want to get any oil or gas out of these holes in the ground, you have to convince the New Zealand government to let you. First, you need an exploration permit, which allows you to do things like seismic surveys and pilot holes. This is a map of all the permits currently in New Zealand. All of the lighter colour ones are in the exploration phase. All the rest have been approved for extraction. As you can see, there are a few offshore fields, but most of them are onshore. Almost all these fields produce oil and gas, but today we're just going to be talking about the gas. These are the 5 biggest producing fields in New Zealand. Behind me, you should be able to see the Pohu extraction platform. It's one of the offshore fields. The largest producing company is called OMV. They're an Austrian company and absolutely massive. Their controversy section on their Wikipedia page is longer than the rest of the article, which is usually a sign. Most of the rest of the extractors are Kiwi owned. The biggest Kiwi owned one being Todd Energy. Todd Energy started off in the 1800s doing metallurgy in a small town in Otago called Hero. The biggest field ever is the Maui field, offshore over that way. Only 2.5% of the gas that was in it is still left, but as of right now, it is the highest producing field in New Zealand still, although Pohu has beaten it in the past few years. Once gas gets out the ground, it needs to be processed at places like this, Todd Energy's facility in Kapuni. Natural gas needs to be 97% methane, but there's a whole bunch of random gases that are in these deposits, and it's different depending on the deposit. And some of them are split off and sold separately. Carbon dioxide is often sold to beverage companies who make carbonated drinks. So some of what you're drinking is pretty much directly from a gas field. Once you have your 97% methane natural gas, it's shoved into a pipeline. This is a map of the North Island natural gas long distance transmission network. Got that. It's entirely owned by First Gas. This actually covers well over half the population of the entire country. This is because it hits all of the major population centres in the North Island. And here's a map of the South Island's transmission network. Yeah, there's nothing here. There's no long-range natural gas transmission in the South Island. We'll get back to that later, but for now, let's go back up north. Just like electricity, there are distributors to get the natural gas from the transmission network to your house. There are only 5 of these. All of them are also electricity distributors. And if you remember my section on distributors in my electricity video, you can see why I'm not going to get too in-depth here. There are also natural gas retailers, which is the company you'll interact with. As you can see, it's basically the same list as electricity retailers, with the notable absence of Meridian and the notable inclusion of Nova as a major retailer. It's only about 4% of our gas is actually used by houses. Where the hell is the other 98% going? There are hundreds of big industrial users of gas that make up that 96%. Gas is either turned into something else, like hydrogen or methanol, or it's burnt to get something hot. Generally, those are the only ways it'll be used. We don't have huge data on everything, but we do have data on the major ones. The biggest user of gas in New Zealand is this, Methanex's Motunui plant. It turns natural gas into 1.7 million tonnes a year of methanol, 95% of which is shipped overseas. It was built by the government in the 80s as part of the Think Big projects, and is now owned by Methanex, which is the largest methanol producer in the world. It wouldn't surprise any Kiwis that Fonterra is on this list. They're our biggest company and have processing plants across the entire country, about 20 of which use natural gas. This is one of them in Eltham. They mostly use natural gas for getting things really hot, which you need in the processing of dairy products like they do. Another huge user is the Kinleith paper mill, owned by OJA Fibre Solutions. I don't really know what they do here, something to do with wood and paper and pulp processing, but they use a lot of natural gas. As far as I can tell, it's mostly to get things very hot, just like Fonterra. Another huge user of gas is the Glenbrook steel mill, who also use it for getting things very hot. Glenbrook, Kinleith and Fonterra all have what's called cogeneration, where they use waste heat, mostly from heating stuff with natural gas, to generate power, and then they can sell that back to the grid or just use it themselves. Cogeneration only accounts for a few percentages of the total grid, but it's a good way of using this waste heat, and the company can make some money off of it too. Despite cogeneration only making up a few percent of our grid, natural gas makes up more like 5%, so it's no surprise that the second biggest user of gas in New Zealand is this, Huntly Power Station. It's our biggest power station. It accounted for something like 7% of our power output last year. It's both coal and gas, but most of the generation is with gas. The other big user of gas for power is Stafford. Stafford has a 400 megawatt regular gas power plant and 2 100 megawatt peaker plants. Peaker plants, like the one at Huntly as well, are designed to turn on and off really quickly to adjust quickly in spikes in demand. They're only matched by hydro in their ability to do this. Underneath Stafford is a depleted gas field called Ahuroa. They use it for gas storage now. It's currently storing about 50 days of gas production, but it's stored almost twice that in the past. The only other major gas plant is Nova's brand new Junction Road facility, also in Taranaki, naturally. The second largest industrial user of gas after Methadex is this, Balance's plant at Kapuni. This facility is New Zealand's only nitrogen urea fertilizer manufacturing facility, and they use a lot of natural gas to make it. So that's where most of our natural gas usage is. And this may be news to some Aucklanders watching, but there are places in New Zealand that aren't on this transmission map. Surely they eat gas too, right? This is where we introduce liquid petroleum gas, or LPG. In New Zealand, LPG is a mix of propane and butane. Both of these are found in gas deposits, and they're also byproducts of other petrochemical processes. LPG is used for this over natural gas because it's more energy dense, so you get more energy for the same amount of gas transported. The LPG usage you'll be familiar with is the type that goes into your gas bottle to power your barbecue or to power your house. This is definitely the most common use case of LPG. Some places have local LPG networks. These are all private networks, and I don't have good maps of them, but I know there's one in at least Christchurch, Dunedin and Queenstown. You can often see these little tags on the road giving indications where there are underground LPG pipes. These networks are mostly to supply businesses and not households. There are also a surprising amount of cars that run on LPG. Seen as a greener fuel than petrol and can be cheaper in some markets. There was a lot of these after the oil shocks in the 80s, but there seems to be a lot less these days. They're filled up at stations like this, which you can find dotted around cities. All the gases we talked about are inherently greenhouse gases, and there are a few uses of them that don't involve carbon emissions. So for climate change, it's important that we take a look at gas and see if we can reduce any of the system. Luckily, we can. Gas usage in power is a complicated one. We need to keep our grid running at all times, but solar, wind and hydro are all weather dependent. You need a lot of storage to be able to rely on renewable sources. So in order to decommission things like Huntly and Stratford, we're going to need just a lot more storage. I think this will eventually be able to happen, but with climate change making weather less predictable, and with the electricity grid needing to get a lot bigger as well for other climate change reasons, I'm not sure of a timeline on this. It's something that is possible, but will take a lot of investment and a lot of time to get there. Places like Fonterra and Glenbrook that mostly use gas to get things really hot are going to be able to replace these systems with electrified versions. Fonterra have already done this at a couple of sites, and Glenbrook are replacing most of their production line with electric equipment over the next few years. Lots of places across the whole country are electrifying heat like this, and it's ironically going to increase power demand quite a bit, which will keep us reliant on gas for electricity for quite a long time. But in the end, it will be worth it. You can also replace gas with electricity in hydrogen production, see my last video. But again, ironically, this will increase the amount of load on the grid, keeping us on gas for longer. Households are actually relatively simple. Lots and lots of houses run without gas at all. Electric boilers are great, electric induction hobs are great, electric heat pumps are way more efficient than gas furnaces. The only negative is instantaneous water heating, which can't be done at a competitive price for electricity yet, but it's getting there. The bigger issue is going to be switching houses off gas to electricity. This is going to take a long time to do completely and probably require a lot of government incentives. But this is worth it because it'll reduce a lot of natural gas transmission line distance, which is important for something we haven't even discussed yet. Fugitive emissions are when gas leaks without being used, intentionally or unintentionally, from any part of the gas system. This is obviously extremely hard to track. As far as I can tell, the numbers we have are all just from gas companies self-reporting, but the numbers are that it's responsible for roughly 2.25% of our entire country's emissions. So it's like 2.25% of our emissions from something that we aren't even using. For context, in 2022, entire electricity grid only used 4.5% of our national emissions. Fugitive emissions are a result of having a gas system at all. Obviously, the only way to reduce them is to reduce the gas system. There are other things people suggest like better tracking and monitoring and better reporting and better standards for infrastructure, but ultimately these are a band-aid on the problem and not really a solution. However, as the gas industry isn't planning on gracefully destroying itself, it's come up with a couple of other options. For one, First Gas is planning to put hydrogen into their natural gas grid. They haven't said how they were going to make this hydrogen. It may just be created with gas, and they'll need to upgrade all of their network infrastructure, but it looks like something they're considering, but very early stages. Probably the biggest thing that gas industry groups and the gas companies themselves talk about is biomethane, or renewable natural gas. That sounds kind of impossible, but here's how it's meant to work. Right now we kind of have two parallel methane systems. One where these companies are getting methane out the ground, using it, and emitting it into the atmosphere, where most of the time it'll react with ozone and become carbon dioxide, and one where plants that use carbon dioxide to grow are cut down by humans and decompose, which releases methane. Then that methane goes into the atmosphere and reacts with ozone to create CO2. This plant system is circular and obviously predates humans by a long shot. The gas industry's plan is to tap their system into this natural circular system. They want to take plants that would normally decompose, releasing their methane into the atmosphere, and capture that methane and use it before putting it in the atmosphere. This, in theory, means that no extra methane from the ground is getting used, and the entire natural gas system fits within this one circular system. In theory, this is actually a solid plan, but the logistics of getting a large amount of organic matter into one place where you can capture the methane are pretty complicated, especially once you've already put a capture device on every landfill in the country. You pretty much can't just cut down more bushland to get this methane. It kind of defeats the purpose of it, but it is probably still better than getting it out from the ground. But I don't see it replacing our natural gas supply anytime soon. I want to end with this graph from Gas Industry, an industry lobbying group that represents these gas companies. This graph is really bad at presenting its information. Firstly, it's upside down, the years should be switched. The numbers are kind of hard to see and also are completely unrepresentative of the bars they're on. The information on the graph is much better presented like this. To me, this shows that the gas industry know it needs to get a lot smaller and change a lot, but it can't really admit that forthright because of economic pressures. To me, the most likely way this goes down is that the natural gas industry is slowly run down, everything that can be converted to using electricity instead is, and the few left required users of gas are powered by biomethane. I think this is a pretty much sustainable way of operating the world and pretty much carbon neutral. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching. This one was kind of hard to produce, but it was really fun and I learned a lot. So yeah, see you all next time.